Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating source text that wrestles with one of the most abstract and honestly profound concepts in spirituality. We're talking about the deep connection between human consciousness and physical space. We usually think of space as this rigid, fixed box that we just happen to walk around in, right? Well, the framework we're exploring today completely flips that on its head. It actually argues that space is totally malleable, that it's directly tied to our minds, and if we can master our consciousness, we can literally transcend our physical limits. It is a wildly interesting perspective, and we're going to break down exactly how this text claims we can pull it off.
So here's the big question driving today's explainer. Can the human mind actually change physical space? Are we just passive subjects sitting in our environments, or do we possess this hidden ability to bend the very dimensions around us? Now, this source text makes the incredibly bold claim that our perception doesn't just passively interpret reality, it actively dictates it. And look, we're not here to declare this as absolute scientific fact, but exploring the mechanics of this philosophy, it gives us a wildly fascinating lens to look at human potential.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We are going to look at the power of consciousness, then compressing the space, expanding the space, changing your environment, and finally, wrap it up with the ultimate goal.
Section 1. The Power of Consciousness.
Right, so before we start bending the universe, we kind of need to understand how this text views our mind's baseline connection to the material world. To do that, we have to define a very specific term from the source, telegnosis. So what is that? Well, according to the text, telegnosis isn't just your standard everyday thinking, it's this heightened state of consciousness that perceives space on a much, much deeper level. Think of it almost like a spiritual compass. The text claims that the space your telegnosis can perceive right now is the exact space your spiritual life will transition to after your physical body passes away. Basically, where your mind goes, your spirit eventually follows. Because of this idea, the text basically hands us a user manual for preparing our consciousness for the afterlife. It maps out a very specific methodology. Step 1 is to actively extend your thoughts to what it calls senior space, these higher planes of existence. Step 2 means you have to vividly imagine and familiarize yourself with those specific senior realms, like the thousand-year world or the Elysium world. You really have to picture them clearly. And then, step 3 is continuously reinforcing that belief. The text argues that doing this will literally evolve your mental and psychological functions so you're ready for those higher realms.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that this is not just about daydreaming. The source material insists that if you maintain this intense, focused mental effort, that imagined space will literally move towards you. You aren't just traveling to the space is actually traveling to you. Your focused thoughts slowly lay the physical and spiritual foundation for you to enter that senior space after death. It's described as this dynamic, two-way magnetic pole that is generated entirely by the power of the mind.
Moving on to Section 2, compressing the space.
Okay, now we're getting into the actual nuts and bolts of manipulating reality. I want you to imagine taking a place thousands of miles away and just mentally pulling it right into your lap. How does the text say we do this? Well, it sets this up with a really beautiful ancient proverb. Bosom friends within the four seas are close neighbors, though separated by great distance. If you've ever felt super close to someone living on the other side of the planet, you've already experienced a basic form of this. Your emotional connection just totally overrides the physical geography. This framework takes that common, everyday feeling and elevates it into a literal law of the universe.
And this is where the text brilliantly updates ancient mysticism for the modern world. It uses the internet as an analogy. Think about it. Once a computer network is set up, a server halfway across the globe is suddenly right there in front of your eyes on a screen. Physical distance just becomes totally irrelevant. The text argues that space itself is just as fluid. Yes, it changes based on physical matter, but more importantly, it changes based on life consciousness. In fact, it asserts that if matter and consciousness didn't exist, well, space wouldn't exist either.
So here is the exact sequence the source claims plays out when you successfully compress space. First, you intensely strengthen your perception of a specific, desired realm. As your mental connection deepens, the literal distance between you and that space starts to shrink. It narrows. Eventually, your consciousness becomes fully integrated into that space. And at that tipping point, the text states your spiritual body successfully leaves the mortal world and arrives in the celestial world. You have essentially compressed the massive distance between the human and the divine down to zero.
Let's see how this builds into Section 3, expanding the space.
Now we're looking at the exact opposite technique. If compression is the tool we use to pull things toward us, expansion is the tool we use for a very different but equally crucial purpose. Let's look at them side by side, because the contrast is really striking. Compressing space is all about connection, right? It's strengthening your bond to a desired realm, like the celestial space, to draw it near. Expanding space, on the flip side, is all about distancing. It's the method you use to push away spaces you dislike, helping you escape worldly constraints and all the trivial drama of the mortal realm. Basically, you compress to reach the divine, and you expand to escape the mundane.
The text breaks down this mental eraser of expansion like this. First, you actively detach your consciousness from whatever environment you dislike. You intentionally block it out of your thoughts. By doing this, the framework suggests you are expanding the space between you and that environment, mentally pushing it further and further away until it just completely disappears from your reality. By mastering this distancing, you surmount those worldly constraints and free yourself up to develop into those senior spaces. You are essentially pushing the negative away so forcefully that it ceases to exist for you.
Which brings us to Section 4, changing your environment.
Now, all this esoteric talk about telegnoses and celestial realms actually has some highly practical applications for our everyday lives. Have you ever felt just totally trapped by your current physical environment? Well, the text gives us some very clear warning signs that your current spatial environment is actively harming your progression instead of helping it. If your freedom feels constrained by your surroundings, if your ability to use your talents is limited, or if the environment is actually putting you at physical or spiritual risk, those are massive red flags. The source warns that you absolutely cannot just sit back and tolerate these conditions.
The text puts a serious sense of urgency on this with a pretty bold ultimatum. It says, if we don't change the space will change us. It's a really stark reminder from the source material that our environments are never just neutral. They are constantly exerting pressure on us. If we aren't actively using our consciousness to dictate our environment, then you better believe the environment is going to dictate who we become. Because of that, the text mandates that we have to be proactive agents in our reality, not just passive victims. You can't just sit around waiting for the space to magically fix itself. You have to set a clear direction and lock on to a firm target in your mind. And once that target is set, you use those exact tools of compression and expansion we just talked about to actively, step by step, build your ideals into reality. You have to take the reins and control the spatial dynamics around you.
And finally, Section 5, the ultimate goal.
So we've talked about how to compress divine space toward us, how to expand worldly space away from us, and how to proactively change our surroundings. But why? What is the actual point of all this intense mental effort according to the source? Well, the text insists that all this spatial manipulation is totally pointless if you don't have a solid foundation. To use space effectively, the source claims you have to understand 3 massive philosophical pillars first: the origin of humans, the function of humans, and the ultimate meaning of life. The idea is that without knowing where we came from, what we're built to do, and why we're even here, we're just aimlessly pushing and pulling at the fabric of reality without a real destination. And that leaves us on a huge cliffhanger straight from the source material. The text states that the answers to those massive questions are actually found in its next chapters, titled Humans and Life. It's basically daring the reader to define their very existence before taking another step. So, based on the framework we unpacked today, if mastering your mind really does mean mastering the space around you, are you ready to define your target? Are you ready to discover the true meaning of your life? That's all for today's Explainer. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.